Thank you so much for joining the pop-up ImagineAI Live podcast studio here at the ImagineAI Live conference in Las Vegas. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Would you please introduce yourself and what you do to our audience?
Yeah, so I'm Nathan Chappell. I serve as head of AI at a company called DonorSearch AI, where we work with around 12,000 nonprofit organizations and been in the AI space since 2017. We're really on the predictive side, and now predictive and gen kind of coming together. And then my volunteer work is really leading a group of around 6,000 people all over the world on the issues around responsible, beneficial AI. So I get the freedom of being a thought leader in my day-to-day job, and then I get, really an honor of leading efforts on the new frontier of making sure that AI doesn't really mess up humanity. Too bad.
Wow, well, a lot to unpack there for a second. So 12,000 nonprofits in America?
There's 1.7 million nonprofit organizations in America, in the US. Yeah. So
wow.
About, I don't know, somewhere close to about 10 million globally.
Mm-hmm. And the 6,000 people you lead, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So back in 2017, when I started working in predictive AI, I realized really quickly based on, models that we were building, like how powerful they were. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take long to figure out, like with great, prediction comes great responsibility. Fundraising is essentially a very unique industry because it's based entirely on trust. So it's not like a thing that's nice to have. It's literally like the nonprofit sector is in the business of trust. And so I started assembling a group of people finding a group of people, like, people raise their hand and be like, yeah, I care about that. Like, I care about the future of, really society. If like we really screw up nonprofits, then, a lot of things that we take for granted will just disappear. Mm-hmm. For a couple of years, it was very kind of a nascent thing of just getting people to come around and, like, yeah, I want to contribute some thought leadership to this. And then COVID happened, and frankly, no one cared because we were all worried about where we're getting our toilet paper. And mm-hmm. then ChatGPT came out and everyone cared. And so as soon as GPT came out, it exploded. And we went from, a few hundred people to over 6,000 people in 38 countries. And we do a global summit. This year, actually, we're expecting 10,000 people to the global summit, in-person events. And it's all volunteer, all grassroots, all open source. It's really cool. Pretty rewarding part of my career right now.
And what's the mission statement? Like, what are all these people doing?
Yeah, so it's specific. It's very niche. And, mm-hmm. While there's like a million different frameworks, thousands of frameworks on responsible AI, they're all largely the same based on, ethics, whatever that means to whoever built them, and however they serve the entity that's building those frameworks. It's a little bit different in that Fundraising AI, so that's the name of it, fundraising.ai, is essentially dedicated to the responsible and beneficial use of AI for the fundraising sector. And the premise of starting there, not just saying, nonprofits use AI responsibly, mm-hmm. fundraising is essentially what drives nonprofits. So if fundraising dies, which in America, I wrote a book on this a year and a half ago called The Generosity Crisis, which is essentially if generosity dies, nonprofits die, then we end up living in societies that are much less generous today. So we kind of like reverse engineer, like, what is this problem? Like, and where do we go to like be able to make the most amount of change? And so that's what we do. Fundraising AI, like we have a framework for responsible mm-hmm. AI. We gather people. It's essentially a think tank.
I thought that America is the most generous country as far as like per capita donations and
yeah.
Is the fundraising trend increasing or decreasing?
No, it's fairly troubling. It's actually troubling in most developed nations. And so the US has the greatest amount of fundraising in total dollars just because we have a lot of very wealthy people. But we're not the most generous country per capita in terms of the percentage of households that give. So America is kind of indicative of this idea. Over the last 20 years, there's been a 16% decline in the number of people who give. And in fact, 2 years ago was the first time that, 20 years ago, 2/3 of Americans gave to charity. And now it's less than half. So wow. Pretty dramatic decrease. Mm-hmm. And this is why I ended up writing a book on this. If we draw a straight line, 16% decline, essentially if you just draw a straight line on that, it ends at zero somewhere. Mm-hmm. And in America, that means it ends in 49 years. So essentially the number of people who give will end up in the single digits if nothing changes. So it's a pretty big inflection point. Like anyone in society that wants to live in a generous society can't just leave this to nonprofits. They have to essentially take action, and whether it's making a donation, paying for a meal, or helping someone. I think we are at a point where we have to really do our best to reverse that trend.
So I imagine that AI is helping on several fronts, like more efficiently helping the fundraisers get money from the funders, and then how to distribute that money efficiently and effectively as well.
It really doesn't matter what flavor of AI, and there's a million different flavors. AI is about efficiency, so I mean, and really what we have now today is just so unique, is that we've got, what predictive AI, which has been around for quite a while, at scale, more affordably and more accurate than it's ever been. So essentially, like, say nonprofits have just way too much data to know, like, who's going to make a gift, or who's going to make another gift, or who's going to whatever. So you've got that ability, and that's been great on its own. And so that's where we started in 2017, and we build custom ML for lots of nonprofits. So they use it to essentially identify, like, who should we go after. But predictions on their own don't really do anything. And similarly, like generative and generating things on their own that's not directed also is just more, right? So like we can produce so much more than we've ever done before in humanity, but how much can we consume? So really what I see the future and the ideal state is like taking predictive and generative together. So you're not getting more is more, but you're getting much more precision and creating content that's like, specific to you. And I mean, that's pretty exciting. I mean, AI can be super scary. And, some of the sessions today at Imagine are like probably caused me not to sleep tonight, but in probably a good way, and maybe not a good way. I don't know. But I think I live in this, like, I wake up every day thinking like, I can spend more time human to human because I have AI essentially doing a lot of the tasks and grunt work that I would have had to spend all my time doing, so that we'd have less time together. So I remain optimistic, at least today. If we decide to shape the future of AI to not only be ethical, from that responsible side, but to also make sure that it benefits humans in the long run, not just in the short run, then I think we can remain pretty optimistic about it.
And can you talk about effective altruism? Because I know that, it's had a bit of a downfall since SBF and, the biggest effective altruist who, stole a bunch of people's money and was a con man. And there hasn't been much talk about it since.
No, it's so sad because I think the essence of it is very strong. So Peter Singer, who's like one of the top ethicists in the world, kind of draws on that effective altruism from the origins of it, which is just like this idea that generosity is a pro-social behavior. So like we're born essentially to be part of a community. Like we're born to help. I mean, frankly, if generosity was not a pro-social behavior, humans would not be here, right? We would have just killed each other and we'd have been done with it. And it was like, well, that was a failed experiment for everyone. But, that was the essence of it. It really became this thing that I think represented inequality, because it was essentially equated to very high net worth people that were controlling things from politics to everything else in between. And it's sad how you took this essence of like, people need to be in community and we should give to another, to essentially almost a guilt trip of like, well, if you're not, this child in, Africa is dying and it's your fault. It took a very dark turn. So I get that question a lot.
Yeah. How do you define it? Like in a sentence, it's like $1. Like how can you most effectively?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the essence is like, we have a responsibility to do something. Yeah. What if you're going to take any amount of money to do good? What is the most efficient, effective way to do that good? And it's hard to argue with that, right? Those are all like really positive things. I think where we've seen with the decline in the number of people who give to charity, there's a greater concentration of total giving by fewer people. And so, this is why it's like, this idea is like, it's everyone's responsibility to, make sure that we shape the future of generosity in the world, because we don't want generosity only to be defined by the few thousand billionaires in the world right now. They could shape their agenda quite easily through their quote unquote, their gifts to charitable organizations.
Right. AI is changing society. Currently, it's going to an uptick in the speed of all of this. There's going to be a lot of job displacement, a lot of disruption. How should society react to all this?
it first starts with this idea. Thanks for asking the question, because I'm sitting in the sessions today and listening for words like ethical, responsible, beneficial, and I'm not hearing a lot. I hear a lot of enthusiasm about scale.
Yeah.
And in the private sector, scale has to essentially trump safety. Unfortunately, the financial incentives will dictate that a for-profit corporation will have to prioritize scale over safety. But it really comes down to this idea that responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. In the same way that, I buy a car in part because it's safe or in part because it looks cool or whatever. But when I drive that car, I don't just say, hey, it's only Volvo's responsibility that I'm safe. Mm-hmm. It's also my responsibility as a driver, and it's a responsibility of every other driver who's also on the road, and also the government who, puts up speed limit signs and fixes potholes. And so I think from a societal perspective, and I think there's a big miss right now, that responsible AI is everyone's responsibility means that you as a user of AI, you're responsible for what tools you're using and whether or not they're quote unquote responsible. As an organizer of a conference, you're convening a conversation to make sure that responsible AI is a topic that is being brought up, which I'm talking about tomorrow. Also as corporations, that they're building AI based on efforts that fit within a responsible AI framework. Now, and so again, I don't blame, like Microsoft has lots of responsible AI frameworks and they use them. That's great. But myself as a consumer, I shouldn't only rely on Microsoft to say, well, they're responsible, therefore I can do whatever I want. So it's a fairly big wake up call. And this is a new type of technology. And so I think society is just not really there yet. Hopefully we'll get there soon.
What would you define as irresponsible AI?
I think it's different in different sectors because the stakes are different. So like if I'm selling a pair of shoes, if I'm building responsible AI to identify the people that are going to buy my shoes, the stakes are fairly low. Like you either buy a pair of shoes or you don't, you're not going to probably screw up the planet too much. I think, when we talk about things like generosity, it's the complete opposite end. It's like, well, I have to build AI that prioritizes trust. Because if I don't have your trust, then I don't have anything. And so, in most regards, responsible AI is kind of based on this ethical framework. And as a lot of times the ethics is defined by whoever's building it. But generally it's like, let's do something that is not biased. It's not racist. We've looked at, a lot of those implicit biases in the models to make sure that they're removed. That can go too far. Google just went too far with the latest version of Gemini, which became, had black Nazis and rewriting history. And so there's definitely a concern there. I think in the nonprofit side, the main difference is that AI in the nonprofit sector, because it's built on trust, it has to be explainable and it has to be transparent. So if you're selling shoes, I don't know if it really matters if it's explainable and transparent. It should have some accountability. Nonprofit sector, like how do you trust something that's a black box that you can't see or interrogate? So I do think that responsible AI takes on different forms based on what the use case is.
So with the job displacement that will happen, how does society adjust to that? I mean, UBI, I'd love to talk about, and because I feel like that's almost a needed thing in the future.
It's not surprising that a lot of the people at the tip of the spear in AI are talking about UBI a lot right now. And I don't think any of them actually understands how it actually will happen or work. But, the part about inequality is so prevalent. The IMF, they released a report a few weeks ago, which basically said 60% of jobs in developed nations will be impacted by AI. So not displaced, but lots of job augmentation and, that type of thing. And it's interesting because if that happens or when that's going to happen, we're already seeing it happen in very small, but it's going to ramp up pretty quickly, especially with like agentive AI that we're talking about today. I think where the societal implications of that is that as inequality increases, that rise in inequality falls somewhere. So it either falls on government or it falls on the nonprofit sector. And right now, the nonprofit sector is not equipped to deal with an increase in inequality. They're barely able to keep up with the inequality that exists today. So, that's a really interesting topic. If we have another one, we could really get into how, and what we can do about it also.
What keeps you up at night? You're talking about some of the stuff you hear that you've heard today might keep you up tonight. I mean, what is your biggest worry about all this change that's happening?
Yeah, it's so funny. There was I think Ethan Mollick, who a lot of people follow on, LinkedIn and whatever. I think he said something recently is if you haven't had 3 sleepless nights in AI, you don't understand AI. I had 2 when I visited OpenAI last October, and 2 sleepless nights after. I was like, whoa, like I was like in their headquarters talking about some stuff that was like, I had to sign an NDA for. And today I'll probably have my 3rd sleepless night. I think if it's anything, it's part anticipation and excitement and part like, oh boy, like this is not like the internet. Like the internet operates today exactly the same way it did in 1994, right? I mean, it's just, it looks better and it's faster, but it basically operates by sending and receiving data exactly the same way. I think when we move into agentive AI, the speed, the frantic pace that the AI sector is moving in, it really is this like frantic pace. There's a lot of potential for missteps and a lot of cutting corners that can happen is if all you're trying to do is compete against the next person, the next company, because these advances happen so quickly. I think what keeps me up at night is like, we could skip many steps in the safety aspect of it. And so awareness is huge. Like something we put a lot of investment into, like, what is this AI going to be? And we find out 2 weeks later that it, is teaching kids how to make chemical weapons. So let's not do that. Like, let's just be very measured and strategic. Let's use it, but be measured and strategic in how we use it.
Where does Elon Musk's AI Grok fall on the ethical scale?
Oh man, you're going to ask all the tough questions. I'm not a fan of it. I think that if you've trained generative AI on a very divisive data set, you're going to get a divisive AI. And so I wouldn't say it's unethical, but I would say it has cause for concern because generative AI especially will reflect the data that it's provided. And Twitter is obviously, X is one of the largest data sets in the world. Therefore, no matter what you do with it, and now that it's open source and open source is a love-hate kind of thing, is that it could be used for tremendous good to identify where are the gaps, like where's the divisiveness and what's the common ground. That's the best case scenario of using it. But the worst case scenario is the polarization of like, I'm going to use it for this and I'm going to use it for that. And we're going to just battle it out. And so...
Yeah, I mean, that's the bad trend that's been happening across America, the polarization, and anything that furthers that is probably not the right direction, trying to focus on those common grounds. And that's why I love the AI space, is that it is this common ground in that it's such a fresh thing and everyone's learning together, and, it can help everybody the same if you know how to use it. And
I think there's a lot of power in understanding that divisiveness and where's the harmony in the middle. Like what are those few threads that are like where people can kind of come together? I mean, there's a lot of really good potential there. And there's companies doing amazing work in that space and trying to figure out how to, essentially bring people together through that polarization.
All right, Nathan. Well, are you having a good time here at the conference?
Awesome. Yeah. It's great until I try to go to bed tonight. And, I lay awake, and then I'll see you tomorrow. And then, it's been awesome. Yeah. Thanks for hosting this and putting it on. I mean, really tremendous attendees from all over.
Well, thank you for coming and representing the ethical side of this. And I definitely want to talk with you in a longer format at a later date. So
awesome. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
As one small step for man,